So we get to the question of, and I think it's one of the tougher ones now as I look at the NFL, absent you just throwing all the resources out of it, how do you build a strong offensive line? I mean, is it a matter of just, I've come to the point where I feel like you just have to overpay, that you have to end up in a position at this point of almost going over the top, because I've just seen, organizations that are a little bit more of a patient, like we have, one early, couple late, sort of go cheap in free agency with the last legs kind of veteran who's maybe got one more year you can sort of squeeze out.
Yep.
What do you think at this point is the pathway on? I think both our organizations will be kind of similar in what they need to do to get there, but I don't know what it is that is the path.
Well, it starts with a great offensive line coach. If you have a great offensive line coach, it is one of the biggest force multipliers in the NFL, period. Like, with no question. You look at what the Eagles do with Jeff Stoutland. Now, they've put a lot of talent in there as well, but he also has that line playing very, very well. And he's done some tremendous development with guys like Jordan Mailata, who was not a great football player, was a great athlete, and is now a great football player. Yes, he has a Hall of Famer, future Hall of Famer in Lane Johnson, and he had Jason Kelsey. But you look at guys like Cam Jurgens. Like, Cam Jurgens was not the most highly sought after center. He definitely had some warts. He was tremendous athletically, but he was also a little bit all over the place. A couple of years now with Jeff Stoutland, Philly fans, for the most part, have not missed Jason Kelsey at center, and that's almost impossible. So having an offensive line coach, we see, the offensive line coach that moved from Tampa to Carolina with Dave Canales, and he made that Tampa Bay line very, very good. The Carolina line was much maligned. They didn't put a lot of new resources into it. They have a lot of the same players they had last year when everybody was complaining about it. This year, they have played much, much better football with basically the same talent. So having that's kind of the master key, is having an offensive line coach that can develop and coach offensive linemen, again, from all over the spectrum and make them work together, allows general managers not to have to go out and spend a top 10 pick on a tackle to make them work. We were just talking this week on the podcast that came out this morning about Luke Gadecki, the Bucs tackle, the right tackle, who is top 10 in the league. I mean, his left tackle, Tristan Wirfs, is number 1 in the league, but he's top 10 in the league. And you have 2 top 10 tackles on the same line. That Gadecki was a second-round pick. Like, I wasn't sure whether he was going to play guard or tackle. Having a good offensive line developer as the coach, who understands not only game plan, but also how to get linemen to play at their top potential and play together, is the way you get out of that. Because I think you're right. It's very expensive, and you can't just pay your way out of it in free agency. It certainly helps. Bears are probably going to have to do some of both. A little
Panthers did a little of that last year too, didn't they? With the
little from column A,
and
little from column B, but you got to have both. And it starts with a coach. And then you're going to get some of these guys that, like you said, with the Hawks, a couple of later round draft picks, who are going to contribute, who are going to come in. They're going to have to play. Injuries happen in the NFL. It's a long season. Offensive linemen, there's a lot of wear and tear. You're going to have some of those 4th round guys, 5th round guys who can come in and hold their own. They don't have to be stars, but they can't be gate 68. We can't just be letting people free for sacks. Like, that's going to get your quarterback killed. So having a guy that can maximize that on the coaching staff is huge for an NFL organization.
Seems like we only got about 5 of those walking the earth, though.
There's not a ton. It's kind of like alien quarterbacks, right? If you don't have one, what are you going to do? Well, you got to do all the other things. I think there's some really good offensive line coaches out there. My secret hope, everybody's talking about Ben Johnson to the Bears. You talk about future in the opening and where the Bears need to go. Everybody's talking about the coach. We'll get there. But my secret hope is that if it's Ben Johnson, that he brings Hank Fraley with him. Because Hank Fraley is the current offensive line coach for Detroit. He's done a tremendous job there. Obviously, a ton of investment on the line. They put a lot of high picks there, but they also play very, very well together. So, like, Ben, if you come to Chicago, bring Hank Fraley. Like, I think Hank Fraley might be the bigger addition. Certainly the less heralded one that might make a bigger difference.
And that's where I would love to get, to me, the offensive line guy. I mean, I think about the old generation, Scarmecchia, Mudd. How many more offensive line coach teams can I think of from the past generations, in that way? And
Callahan,
Callahan too, and he's still rolling there with his son going. So there are good ones. It just seems hard to find those guys. What I'm trying to say on that. And so then I go, well, if I can't get that, and I'm stuck with my O-line coach as it is, does it then become about maybe topping off the tank, spilling it over the sides, and that you got to just be willing to do that? Because we have tried here for quite a long time. It's been 10 years since Snyder's really built a quality offensive line. I'm not talking dominant, by the way. I'm just talking, just gets to middle of the road at this point would be a boon, where we're so back in every single year. And so that's where I've gotten to myself. Maybe it's desperation on it. Maybe it's not the smartest approach to it, EJ. But I mean, even that Panther team, man, that new line coach helped, but $20 million, the first $20 million a year guard at right guard, $13 million to Damian Lewis at left guard. Going to give you about average play, but with Iki Okawanu that they drafted a couple years ago at left tackle and it's like, it kind of comes together. Good offensive line coach. So I think you're signing off on my approach. If we can't get the grade A offensive line coach, go hard on this. Priority number one this offseason from a Seahawks standpoint. And would you look at the same thing from your Bears situation?
Yeah, it is the number one thing at this point. It doesn't necessarily line up ideally with where the talent is in the draft, because that's the other thing. There's only two pools here, right? You can only get them from free agency, occasionally trades, but top offensive linemen don't come available in trade without a reason typically, and the draft. And so you have to look at like, hey, every team has needs. Do those needs line up with the draft this year? And there's some good offensive tackles for sure. I don't know that it's as deep as it has been. There's some very top talent folks. It drops off more quickly, which means, again, supply is limited. Demand's going to be great as always, which means you're going to have a very high pick and be willing to spend it if you need a premium tackle. Into your offensive line, I think there are more guys this year, but the center class has taken a huge hit. A couple of guys going back, guy getting injured, like 3 of the top, arguably 4 centers available are not now going to be available in the draft, which means, again, supply gets super limited. There's a great need, but the Bears are going to have to bite the bullet and probably overinvest because it just hasn't worked. And if it just doesn't work again, you're done. Like, you might ruin Caleb from a physical standpoint, and you can't afford to do that. He's the most important guy in the building. Therefore, you're going to have to do everything. And I would, yes, people ask me all the time, would you pay Trey Smith? Would you make him the highest paid guard in the league? I would. I've met Trey. I'm biased. Like, I've seen his tape. I loved him coming out. I was worried about the medical issues just like everybody else. That's why the Chiefs got him where they got him. But I got a chance to meet him this summer at OLM down in Dallas, offensive line mastermind, Duke Manyweather's offensive line summit. And he's one of Duke's guys. And I got to talk to him for about 15 or 20 minutes after one of the little huddles. And I just, when I say talk, I got to listen to him. Like, I shut my mouth and was like, you know way more about this, and I want to know everything you know. So I'm going to ask you like one question and shut up, be quiet. And in that 15 or 20 minutes, it was one of the most valuable professional experiences I've had this year. And the question is, would I pay that guy all the money for the on the field stuff, for between the ears stuff, for the off the field stuff? I would pay that guy the money, and I would not sweat it, because he is a rock that you can build your church on. Like, that is a guy that is that kind of player. So I would worry less about that. A lot of times when you're paying anybody, any position at the top of the market, I'm like, you probably do better. Trey, I'm not sure you can do better. So I'm just like, nope, that would be great, but don't stop there. Like, don't go, oh, we paid Trey all the money and it's fixed, because it's not, because you're so far in the hole. You need another center. Like, Shelton's been good, but I would love it if Shelton was the backup for a good reason. There was a scare. Looks like Braxton Jones avoided serious injury, but it looked like he might have torn his knee completely. And again, late in the season, that means long recovery. It means he's not going to be available for most of next season. That means you need to go get another tackle. And again, tackle supply is limited. It's expensive. I don't care if it's in free agency or the draft. Yes, over index, fix it. It's possible that like Darnell Wright is your only keeper on the offensive line right now. And that's a terrible place for any of it. It's so expensive to try and replace 4 starters on an offensive line in 1 year. It's almost impossible.
It really is. And I think the general managers also have some trepidation outside of those organizations, like, let's say, maybe an Eagles or some of these teams that have truly put that heavy investment into that offensive line in a major way where they recognize it. The ones that don't do that seem to really turn hard away from that. You mentioned trades, and I think you're right. They're hard to be done, but I think that they're also, let's see if you buy into this. I think that these trades don't get done for these offensive linemen because of some of these general managers who have a little bit of that mindset of, it's not the most important thing to me, because they know that they have to give up too much draft capital to get it done. Like, it would take you giving up that extra pick you don't want to give up to make it happen, to sway that other general manager to let that really good offensive lineman out of their grip. And then they don't want to cross that bridge. Do you think I'm off on that?
No, I don't. Not at all. And the reason I don't think that is because I'm a Bears fan, not because I don't personally believe it, but I've watched, again, one of the most confusing things about this is Ryan Poles is a former offensive lineman himself. Like, that's what he was as a player. So you would believe that he believes in its importance to a football team. He has not been able to get it done, and he's taken that approach of, I will do these lower end trades. I will do these lower picks. I will not put, outside of Darnell Wright, a huge priority on it. And it hasn't worked, and it hasn't worked, and it hasn't worked. And he still believes in it. I still talk to some people like, yeah, you need a center, but I wouldn't spend like a low first round pick on them, even though it's one of the safest positions to pick in the draft historically. statistically. And I'm like, well, when does that become a thing? Like, what more do you need to see to say this is wrecking our chance at offensive success? And it's a little bit of offensive line blindness in general. I think a lot of people don't. They say, yeah, you have to have a good offensive line. You're like, okay, pay for it. And they're like, well, that might be a little too much. And you're like, well, if you want one, you have to do the other. And again, we're talking about supplies being limited. There is not an overabundance of great offensive line talent around the NFL, right? There is a dearth of it. Like there is less than you need. You see teams every week, especially this week, like these last weeks of the season, when attrition has happened, you see teams rolling out some pretty sketchy guys on offensive line at a pro level. There's just not enough of them rolling around. It is a difficult position and you're going to have to pay for it if you want it. And everybody says it's important, but then push comes to shove and I don't know. Maybe I'll give a third round pick for a center, but I wouldn't do a second. Like I've had people who are hardcore Chicago fans who understand the draft, who are in the business, tell me, I wouldn't pay a high second for a center. And I'm like, really? Okay. Like Creed Humphrey was a high second. You wouldn't pay a high 2 for somebody like Creed to anchor the Bears line for the next 10 years? Why not?